Hello, welcome to Papa Nick's Music. I am, as always, your host, Papa Nick Lewis, and today, things are a little bit different here at the international headquarters of the multimedia entertainment conglomerate that is Papa Nick's Music. First off, I'm wearing glasses today, and I'm doing this in part because all of my entries on today's list are CDs, and I want to be able to read the back of them. Also because I've got horrible splotches on my face, and it's easier to wear glasses than it is to apply makeup. I'm also not wearing a Hawaiian shirt. It's the first video I've done where I'm not wearing a Hawaiian shirt. Will the miracles never cease? All of which has nothing to do with what we're talking about today, which is comeback albums. Over on his Sea of Tranquility channel, Pete Pardo has been talking about comeback albums throughout the month. Every day he talks about another album. This has captured my attention. I wanted to spend a little time talking about my favorite comeback albums. Now, he is defining comeback albums as, an album that's released after a hiatus, after personnel changes. Maybe somebody has left the group and they're having to reform. Maybe somebody has died and they're having to compensate for that, whatever. I'm just going by the hiatus thing. I've got my 10 plus favorite comeback albums here, and as I look down my list, the smallest gap I have between the previous album and this album is 7 years. The largest one I've got is 35 years. So I'm just limiting myself to musical artists, recording artists who released an album after a fairly lengthy fallow period of no album releasage. If I can say that. My video, I can say it. So we're going to talk about. I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite comeback albums today because it's a top 10 favorites. First off, in order to be considered for membership in the club, it has to be an album that is my favorite. I like it, but I also have to own a copy of it. I'm just limiting myself to what I have in my library. All on CD. Secondly, because it's a top 10 series, Papa Nick's Music's top 10 series is unofficially sponsored by Schofferhofer Beer. If you like grapefruit soda mixed with beer, you're going to love Schofferhofer. That's good beer. And then finally, even though this is clearly, I'm labeling it my favorites, I'm still going to talk about the subjectivity notice. We firmly believe here at Papa Nick's Music, the royal we, if you'll let me get away with that, we firmly believe here at Papa Nick's Music that there's no such thing as objective quality when it comes to art. The aesthetic experience is inherently subjective. There's no objectively good or objectively bad music. There is only music that we like and music that we do not. And as long as we keep that in mind, this is a wonderful conversation. It only goes off the rails when somebody starts insisting on being seen as objectively right. So let's not do that. I'm not saying these are objectively the best comeback albums or anything like that. These are the ones I really like. Okay? Okay. So coming in at number 10 on my list of favorites, this album was released in 2012, and it is The Sound of the Life of the Mind by the Ben Folds Five. The previous album that they released was the unauthorized biography of Reinhold Messner in 1999, so we've got a 13-year gap between those. Ben Folds was releasing a lot of music during that time, but this is him recording with his original supporting players, Robert Sledge on bass, Darren Jesse on drums, and I have to look up because I always forget Robert Sledge's name. I apologize, Robert, if you're watching this. For whatever reason, I can hang on to Darren Jesse's name, but yours always slips my mind. But we've got the Ben Folds Five back together. We've got a few good songs on here. Draw a Crowd is decent. Do It Anyway is good. Away When You Were Here. Yeah, there's some decent stuff on here. I don't think it's just a stellar album. I like it better than the unauthorized biography of Reinhold Messner. but I don't think it's as good as the first two, Ben Folds 5 and Whatever and Ever, Amen. But still, worth being number 10 on my list. Number 9. Sometimes, I think back to videos that I've done, topics that I've done, and artists that I've talked about, and it almost seems like I'm going out of my way to look for opportunities to talk about this next band. It seems like I go out of my way to find reasons to talk about most of these recording artists. But this one, oh man. Am I the only person who is excited that the Greg Kihn Band reformed in 2017 to release Rekindled, which was their first album since... Okay, complicated issue here. It was Greg Kihn's first release since Horror Show in 1996, and I'm reading these dates off my notes over here. It was the first major label release, I want to say, since Love and Rock and Roll, which was the last album that he did in his 80s heyday from 1986. But Love and Rock and Roll, like Citizen Kihn before it, was just credited to Greg Kihn. It wasn't the Greg Kihn Band. So the last album that was credited to the Greg Kihn Band was Contagious from 1984. So we're talking about a 33-year gap for the Greg Kihn Band. It's not the same band other than Greg Kihn, but that's how I'm measuring it. And this is a much better album than I was expecting it to be. I bought my copy of this as soon as it was released, and I was like, I hope, but deep down I was afraid. And it turns out that hope won, because this is actually a pretty good album. Greg Kihn's voice is still pretty good. His son, Ry Kihn, is the lead guitarist for him and is a hell of a musician. I Wrote the Book is good. Big Pink Flamingos is good. The Life I Got is good. Good to Be Me. There's some good stuff on here. Well worth tracking down. Well worth listening to. Number 9, the Greg Kihn Band with Rekindled. Number 8. No secret that I'm a big fan of Michael Nesmith. So we pretty much have to talk about Raise. He released Raise in 2005. Prior to that, his previous album his most recent release before this was The Garden in 1994. If you want to count that, it's not a typical pop release. So to get a typical pop release, you'd have to go back to 92 for Tropical Campfires. So we're talking about either 11 or 13 years, depending on which of those you key off of. But still, a good-sized gap. And Raise is a wonderful album. I don't think it's as good as Tropical Campfires, but it is a very good album. It's a strong album. Zip Ribbon is decent. Dynaflow, I like Dynaflow. Boom Car is fun. Land of Pies, oh, I love Land of Pies. There It Is a wonderful song as well. Raise, Michael Nesmith, 2005. Wonderful, wonderful record. Okay, coming in at number 7. He said, reaching for his Schofferhofer. That's good beer. So I'm a huge fan of this next artist. And the same kind of thing I was just talking about with Greg Kihn, right? When I heard that this album, this album I'm about to hold up, when I heard that it was going to be released, part of me was excited, part of me was afraid, because I didn't know really what to expect. And then the album came out, and oh my God, I loved it. And it is, to this day, one of my favorite albums. I mean, if I sit down and make my list of my all-time favorite albums, regardless of genre, regardless of artist, just, if I'm making my top 40 albums that I've got to have a copy of, this is definitely in the conversation to be on that list. It should crack the top 40. It may even crack the top 10. I really, really like Imagination by Brian Wilson. When I first heard that it was coming out, it was released in 1998. I didn't know what to think. There was a release 3 years prior, from 1995, an album called Orange Crate Art. Brian played music on that and sang. He performed all the lead vocals. But the album itself is credited to Van Dyke Parks and Brian Wilson, because Van Dyke Parks wrote all of the songs. And there was just something about that. I mean, his voice sounded good, but he's singing Van Dyke's music. He's not singing his own music. Made me think, okay, maybe he's lost his fastball. But man, this thing showed he still had his fastball. Yes, there are a few songs on here that he has gone back. They're old Beach Boys songs that he has repurposed. We've got Keep an Eye on Summer and Let Him Run Wild. So, he's hedging his bets a little bit, but overall, Your Imagination is fantastic. She Says That She Needs Me, I think, is wonderful. Lay Down Burden. Oh man, that song just makes me cry. I think it's so beautiful. I love Brian Wilson's Imagination. And if we can say that it was that it came after a 3-year hiatus, if we're looking at Orange Crate Art, I prefer to look at his first solo album, the self-titled Brian Wilson from 1988. So a 10-year gap. Brian Wilson, Imagination. Love this album. Okay. Coming in at number 6. In 2001, ELO released an album. This Zoom is the first album that they had released since Balance of Power in 1986, so that's a 15-year gap. You could also make the argument that this is essentially a Jeff Lynne solo album, as the later ELO releases have also been, because he's performing the bulk of the music on this thing. In which case, it is the first album that he's released of his own music since Armchair Theater of 1990, which I think is a wonderful album. Definitely, strongly encourage you to check it out. This was, so we're talking about either 11 or 15 years, depending on which benchmark you want to use. And this was fantastic. I mean, I didn't have fear when it came to this one. I was afraid that maybe Brian's mental health issues and drug-related demons had sabotaged him. I was afraid that maybe Greg Kihn had just aged out of his voice. I had no fears when it comes to Jeff Lynne. If Jeff Lynne releases it, it's going to be good. He's not going to allow something that is suboptimal to go out. So, and I was gratified. Zoom by ELO, my number 6. Coincidentally, my number 5 album is also titled Zoom, and it's Zoom by The Knack. The Knack released Zoom in 1998, which was their first release since Serious Fun of 1991, which was a crap album. So it's really their first good release since 1981's Round Trip. So we're talking almost 20 years. Technically 7 years, but still, that's a decent sized gap. And oh my God, is this thing good? The Knack post Round Trip. We've got 3 Knack albums, and they all 3 have different drummers because they were trying very hard to find somebody who could fill Bruce Gary's shoes. Bruce Gary is just a phenomenal drummer. They got very close here. The drummer on Zoom is Terry Bozzio, who drummed a lot with Frank Zappa, and is just a monster drummer. He's a joy to listen to throughout this thing. But the songwriting is good. It's good pop. Pop is Dead is wonderful. Smilin' is wonderful. Harder on You is wonderful. Tomorrow. A lot of really good music on here. Very strongly recommend Zoom by The Knack. Zoom by ELO. My next album, titled Zoom, coming in at number 4. Let me adjust my spreadsheet. Coming in at number 4. In a way, I've already talked about this artist because I was just talking about Brian Wilson a while ago. So No surprise that I've got the Beach Boys on my list. 2012, as part of their 50th anniversary, they released That's Why God Made the Radio. The first album, the first original studio release from the Beach Boys since the lamentable Summer in Paradise of 1992. So we're talking about a 20-year gap here. And this thing is a surprisingly good album. I say surprisingly good because Summer in Paradise was, oh, Jesus Christ, that thing was, that was a stink bomb. Their 1985 self-titled album was pretty good. I like it. Keeping the Summer Alive, the MIU, or LA, MIU, Beach Boys Love You. Oh. I mean, you've got to go all the way back to Holland to find something that is good in the Beach Boy catalog. And I'm not saying this thing is as good as Holland. It is not as good as Holland, but it's definitely better than all of that crap that that they released. It's the best thing that they have done since Holland. The only serious competition it has is the 1985 self-titled album. I think this one's a little bit better. The thing that frustrates me about this was the thing that frustrated me about the 50th anniversary concert tour. I thought it was wonderful that Brian and Mike put aside their differences long enough to actually go out on tour together. I thought that was fantastic. And they brought Al along, and we've got Bruce Johnston, we've got David Marks, who hadn't toured with him since, early 60s. And so, that was all wonderful, and I liked that. I thought they should have made more of an effort to try to include Ricky Fataar and Blondie Chaplin. And I would love to have seen Ricky Fataar and Blondie Chaplin on this. I dearly would have loved to have seen Ricky and Blondie on that tour. And it was a wonderful concert, and I'm very glad I went to it. There were several times where I just wept like a child that I was finally able to hear the Beach Boys proper do these songs that are encoded in my DNA. But I would like to have seen Blondie and Ricky up on stage with them. But it doesn't seem fair to me to hold that against this. Hell of a decent album, particularly compared to, like I said, Summer in Paradise, which was just, holy mother of God. Number 4, That's Why God Made the Radio by the Beach Boys. Okay. At number 3, I've got the Joe Jackson Band's Volume 4. This is similar to Ben Folds 5, right? Joe Jackson has been releasing music at a steady pace. He'll go fallow for a year or two, but man, he's been cranking stuff out. But for this project, he reunited with his original band. Graham Mabey on bass, Dave Houghton on drums, and Gary Sanford on guitar. And this is the first album that they recorded together since Beat Crazy. Beat Crazy was 1980. This was 2003. So we're talking about a 23-year gap. And fantastic album. Songwriting is top. This is one of Joe Jackson's better albums. It's toward the top of my list. Take It Like a Man is great. Awkward Age. I love Awkward Age. Chrome is wonderful. Little Bit Stupid is good. Bright Gray. A lot of good music on Volume 4. Strongly recommended from 2003, Joe Jackson Band. Okay. Now, for my top 2, I actually have 2 ties. Kinda ties. Kinda. It's going to make sense here in a second. Good beer. For my number 2A, I have 1996's Justice by the Monkees. I am among Monkees fans a little unusual because I actually like this album. A lot of people dump on Justice. They say that the songwriting is bad, and they say that it's too much an artifact of its time. It sounds too much like 1996, which was a crappy year for music. And yeah, they're trying a bit too hard to sound grungy. Yeah, I got it. I'm with you, but still, decent album. Much better than its predecessor, 1987's Pool It. So there's a 9-year gap between Pool It and this thing, and yeah, this thing, way better than Pool It. Pool It was a piece of crap. You could also make the argument that this is the first Monkees album for the Monkees proper, in that all four appear on it, since the Head soundtrack, which was what, 67? Might be 68. I'm pretty sure it's 67. So if we're talking 1996 going back to 66, 67, right, we're talking 29 years since, it's been the four guys together. But I do like this album. I think it's definitely a good comeback album, and it's one of their stronger albums, I think, largely because it's all four of them playing. The only album where they played all of the instruments. I know, a lot of people say Headquarters, they played their own, and no, they had help with Headquarters. They didn't have help here. For number 2B, I'm sticking with the Monkees, and we've got Good Times. Good Times was released in 2016. This thing was released in 96, 2016. There's a 20-year gap between these two albums. And this one is fantastic. This one is definitely on par with their 60s heyday. This one, we've got all four Monkees, but we also have the extended session musicians. Adam Schlesinger produced the album, and he appears on several tracks. There are some that are reworked, jazzed up, cleaned up versions of songs that were originally recorded back in the heyday. So you've got Mike Nesmith playing rhythm guitar. You've got Peter Tork playing the organ. You've got Chip Douglas playing the bass, and you've got Fast Eddie Ho playing the drums on some of these songs. And that's exactly the lineup you were listening to back when you were listening to Pisces, Aquarius, Capricorn, and Jones. So, there's a stronger connection between the 60s heyday and Good Times. And the quality of the songwriting is better. The quality of the performances is better. Fantastic album. Love Good Times. And I don't feel at all guilty for having two Monkees albums here, sharing my number 2 spot. In fact, I'll even point out that I splurged to get a copy of Good Times on vinyl that Mike and Mickey both signed. Peter was supposed to sign it, but, things happen. Oh, well. For my number 1, it's not quite the same situation as I have with the Monkees, where I've got, 2 albums spaced out by the same group. I've got albums that feature a common denominator. And that common denominator is one of my musical heroes, one of my favorite songwriters, one of my favorite musicians, Neil Innes. And Neil Innes is deserving of being here at the number 1 spot for this album. This is Nearly Really, which he released in 2019, shortly before he passed. And this is the first original studio release of his, I believe, since 2005's Works in Progress, which itself was the first studio release since 1982's Off the Record. There were several things that he released in the intervening years, but they were, compilations and soundtracks and stuff like that. They weren't like studio pop albums. And this is a wonderful album. But a thing to keep in mind about Neil Innes is that the man had a lot of irons in the fire. He wasn't just recording his own stuff. He was also recording for the Ruddles. And we've got Archaeology here with Ricky Fataar. Love Ricky Fataar. John Halsey and Eric Idle and Neil Innes. Freudian slip there. Neil Innes the Ruddles, the original Ruddles, are back. And like the anthology album that the Beatles did that in part inspired this, some of these songs are new, but a lot of it some of them are older songs that are they're polishing up and blowing the cobwebs off and redoing. One is that We've Arrived, and to prove it we're here. I love that title. They recorded while they were rehearsing it, and it's obvious that they're rehearsing it because they don't quite know it yet. But there's a lot of really good music on here. Rendezvous is great. Questionnaire. Oh, I love Questionnaire. It's one of the songs that I perform when I play out. Joe Public, Eine kleine Mittelklasse Musik, back in '64. Unfinished Words, Hey Mister. Oh man, this thing is a gold mine of wonderful music. So this is deserving of being at the number one spot. I've just realized this was released in 1996. The previous Ruddles album was released in 1978, so we got an 18-year gap there. But the granddaddy of them all, the largest gap I have on my spreadsheet, was for the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band. This is Pour l'amour des chiens, which they released in 2007. And that was the first album that the Bonzos released since 1972's Let's Make Up and Be Friendly. This is a wonderful album. Viv Stanshall had long since passed away, so there's no Viv Stanshall on here. But to fill his rather sizable shoes, they recruited Stephen Fry, Phil Jupitus, and Ade Edmondson. And between the three of them, they almost compensate for no Vivian Stanshall. But they also went back. They've got Bob Kerr is on here, although he might say it Carr. And he was a very early member. I don't even know if he was. I think he was gone by the time they started recording. But all the greats are back. We've got Neil, yes. We've got Roger Ruskin Spear. We've got Legs Larry Smith, Vernon Dudley Bohey Noel, and Sam Spoons. Just like back in the good old days. This is a great album. Pour l'amour des chiens by the Bonzo Dog Band. And those are my favorite comeback albums. All, 15 of them. What are yours? Let me know in the comments down below. I always love hearing from you. If you enjoy... That sounded dismissive, but I do always love hearing from you. If you enjoyed today's video, I'd appreciate it if you'd click the like button while you're down there clicking. If you have not already done so, go ahead and click the subscribe button. It would be nice. It's free. Might as well. If you do subscribe, be sure to click the bell for notifications. It's important to the YouTube folks, so I would appreciate it. Thanks again for watching today, and I hope that the rest of your day is jubilant. See you soon.